On March 20th, 2020, construction workers on a bridge in Florida found every parent's worst nightmare. Lying under the bridge was a box. Inside it, the remains of an 11-year-old boy. The boy was Gannon Stauch, and his family had been looking for him for over 6 weeks. But how he ended up under that bridge, over 29 hours drive away from his family home, is a long and difficult story to tell. It starts in January of that same year when his stepmother, Letecia Stauch, made a phone call to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado. She said that Gannon had gone to visit some friends sometime between 3:15 and 4 p.m, but he hadn't returned home. It was getting late and Letecia was starting to worry. She reported Gannon as missing, and officers arrived at the home around 10 p.m. to gather more information and search the property. Gannon's father, Al Stauch, had been deployed as part of the National Guard only 2 days prior, leaving his son alone with Letecia and their 17-year-old daughter, Harley, in the house that Gannon would later go missing from. Letecia at first claimed to not know anything about Gannon's disappearance, but even on that first night, the investigators had a hard time believing her story. They reported Gannon as missing and a possible runaway juvenile, while they informed the rest of the family what was going on and tried to get to the bottom of it all. The very next day, on January 28th, Letecia drove her own car to a short-term parking lot at the airport and hired a rental. She then used the rental car to pick up Al Stauch when he arrived to try and help in the search for his missing 11-year-old son. Some people argue because she had Gannon's body hidden in her car, and she didn't want Al to find it. Around 7 o'clock that night, she returned to the car park, allegedly hid Gannon's body in a new location, and then used her own vehicle to pick her mother up. The rental was not returned until 9 a.m. the following morning, and by then, the investigators were more than eager to speak with Letecia again. They discovered blood in Gannon's bedroom and uncovered the fact that Harley had been sent out the evening that Gannon had gone missing to buy some baking soda, plastic bags, and carpet cleaner, and the investigators wanted to know why. They then asked Letecia to come down to the office for an interview. She showed up at the station over 2 hours late. Her car freshly washed and completely clean, and her clutching a pile of random papers. When asked to explain the blood, Letecia suddenly remembered a lot more that had happened on the day Gannon had disappeared. She claimed that a man named Eduardo had broken into the house. He'd first sexually assaulted Letecia and then abducted Gannon. The cleaning supplies had been to clean the area and cover up the sexual assault before the investigators arrived to look for Gannon. This change in her story was enough for the investigators to seize Letecia's phone and for them to get a warrant to retrieve DNA samples. When Letecia realised what was going on, she reportedly began stuffing tissue papers down her trousers, claiming that she couldn't breathe and that there was something wrong with her heart. Seeing her strange behaviour, the investigators rushed Letecia to the hospital, where the staff discovered no life-threatening illnesses, and Letecia slipped away without anyone in law enforcement knowing where she was going. Letecia wasn't being charged or arrested for anything at that time, so she didn't have to let law enforcement know that she was leaving, but all of this made the investigators bump Gannon's disappearance up to a missing/endangered persons case. This also meant that they could ask the FBI and the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children to help with the case, and Gannon's story went national. On February 1st, Letecia rented a van, and she and her daughter Harley got ready to go on a long drive. But there was something Letecia had to do first. Even without the investigators officially coming out and naming Letecia as a suspect, the public were finding her behaviour and response towards her missing stepson very suspicious. Seeing this, Letecia decided to speak to the press and particularly called out comments online that were pointing the finger at her. She said to KKTV, quote, "I took care of Gannon for the last 2 years in our home. I would never, ever hurt this child. And I know there are some questions out there. That's up to the investigations, when they end up letting you guys know, but I've cooperated with them. We are going to find Gannon, and that's the main goal that we all have. I'm just ready for Gannon to come home." The very next day, after this interview aired, Letecia checked into a hotel in Florida. This hotel was almost 2,000 miles away from Colorado, but only 3 miles away from where Gannon's body was eventually found. But while Letecia was doing whatever it was she was doing in Florida, the search for Gannon in Colorado was still in full swing, and a neighbour had just stumbled across a damning piece of evidence. The very same day Letecia checked into her hotel, this neighbour went both to Stauch and to law enforcement. He had surveillance footage from outside of his house that showed Letecia and what appeared to be Gannon getting into her car at around 10:13 that morning when Gannon disappeared. When Letecia came back, she arrived at around 19 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, and she returned alone. Gannon was nowhere to be seen. According to her own initial timeline, it's only about an hour later that Gannon walked out of the house to go to his friends and disappeared. But according to this footage, Gannon wasn't even in the house when Letecia claimed he was. No one in the family publicly addressed the growing suspicions that Letecia had something to do with Gannon's disappearance, but behind closed doors, Al was trying to get to the bottom of it, and most importantly, find his son. He later claimed that in the space of only 24 hours, Letecia told him 5 different versions of what had allegedly happened that afternoon. These stories also changed a lot and didn't seem to have that much in common with each other. One version had only Letecia being sexually assaulted before Gannon's abductor took him away. Another had both Letecia and Gannon being sexually assaulted by a man who then hid in the house whilst investigators were searching it to look for Gannon. Another had Letecia held at gunpoint and the man then took Gannon. Another had her stopping the car when she saw a man lying in the middle of the road. The man had then jumped up, sexually assaulted Letecia, and abducted Gannon. And the other had Gannon test riding a bicycle before getting into a nasty fall and hurting his head. While Gannon was dealing with his injury, Letecia claimed that a man who was different to the first man she claimed had sexually assaulted her and abducted Gannon had swooped in and taken her stepson. But no matter how many times her story changed, Letecia couldn't say anything to shirk suspicions, and she was arrested on March 2nd. She was charged with first-degree murder, even though by that time Gannon's body still hadn't been found. Letecia was also charged with child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. It was 18 days later that the construction workers in Florida opened the box they'd found under that bridge and found Gannon's remains wrapped up in a blanket. And it was only then that the true extent of what had happened came to light. Gannon had been shot in the jaw, stabbed in the chest and back about 18 times, and his skull had been fractured. His body showed signs of defensive wounds on his arms and legs, and a bullet was later found lodged in his skull. Distraught over what had happened, Al filed for divorce immediately, and needless to say, the charges against Letecia suddenly carried a lot more weight. But her erratic behaviour had everyone on edge. Everyone wanted to know if Letecia had done this on purpose, or if she had some sort of mental break, or even another mental illness. Before the case was sent to court, Letecia went through a mental health evaluation which found her mentally competent to stand trial. In January of 2021, Letecia filed a motion to represent herself, and it was granted. A few months later, and this was overturned, and Letecia was appointed new public defenders. Her lawyers then changed her plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. And that takes us to the present day. Her case is ongoing in court right now, with all of the evidence and witness testimonies finally available for the public to see. We will have to wait to find out what the final ruling is, but Letecia has either doubled down on the image of her being mentally ill, or there's a chance there's something really there. She has since claimed that the devil speaks to her, and she has a button in her cell that she can use to call vampires she'd met whilst living in Alaska. She claims to speak with the vampires often, and they share names with vampires in the Twilight series. Who knows what the truth is, but we'll have to watch and wait to see how the rest of the trial unfolds. What won't change by the end of everything, though, is that a child's life was unfairly and cruelly cut short, and a whole family will be dealing with Gannon's loss for the rest of their lives.